All right. Welcome to another edition of the Black Bullion Show, episode 6. Today we're talking about oil and its influence on the US dollar. Um, so I'm going to go through a brief history of oil and its impact on the US dollar. And I just kind of want to give you guys, essentially one of the reasons why I am not that trustworthy of the US dollar as a store of value, essentially because its value keeps being traded from one thing to another, and it's essentially based around trust. So I'm going to get into this article, a couple of articles here. One of them is from Value Walk. It's How World War One Ushered in the Century of Oil. So I'm just going to read through a couple of paragraphs on this. I want you guys to just bear with me here, and things will start coming together. If this is the first time you've heard about oil and its connection with the US dollar. So, getting in here. The Navy converted to oil from coal a few years ago before the U.S. entered World War I, helping to solidify petroleum's strategic status. On July 7, 1919, a group of U.S. military members dedicated Zero Milestone, the point from which all road distances in the country would be measured, just south of the White House lawn in Washington, D.C. The next morning, they helped to define the future of the nation. Instead of an, expl- Instead of an exploratory rocket or deep sea submarine, these explorers set out in 42 trucks, 5 passenger cars, and an assortment of motorcycles, ambulances, tank trucks, mobile field kitchens, mobile repair shops, and Signal Corps searchlight trucks. During the first 3 days of driving, they managed just over 5 miles per hour. This was most troubling because their goal was to explore the condition of American roads by driving across the U.S. Participating in this exploratory party was none other than U.S. Army Captain Dwight D. Eisenhower. Now, a lot of you may not even know that Dwight Eisenhower was such a big part of our military, before he became president. So we're digging into it. Although he played a critical role in many portions of 20th century U.S. history, his passion for roads may have carried the most significant impact on the domestic front. This trek literally and figuratively caught the nation and the young soldier at a crossroads. Returning from World War I, Ike was entertaining the idea of leaving the military and accepting a civilian job. His decision to remain proved pivotal for the nation. By the end of the first half of the century, the roadscape, transformed from an interstate highway system while he was president, helped remake the nation and the lives of its occupants. For Ike, though, roadways represented not only domestic development but also national security. By the early 1900s, it become that might need to be it became or it had become clear to many administrators that petroleum was a strategic resource to the nation's present and future. Now, this is the important part here. At the start of World War I, the world had an oil glut, since there were few practical uses for it beyond kerosene for lighting. When the war was over, the developed world had little doubt that a nation's future standing in the world was predicated on access to oil. The Great War introduced a 19th century world to modern ideas and technologies, many of which required inexpensive crude. Oil drilling. This is a picture of oil drilling in Beaumont, Texas in 1901. The U.S. supplied crude oil to its allies in World War I and relied on domestic production after its entry. Now I'm going to stop right here because this is key, and I'm not going to go into it, through this article. But the U.S. applied, uh, those who were involved in World War I with oil. and they made a lot of money from it. Money, uh, essentially gold. Um, this pattern repeated in World War II, though we did lose some money by being involved in World War II. But I'm just going to continue on here. Prime movers and national security. During and after World War I, there was a dramatic change in energy production, shifting heavily away from wood and hydropower and toward fossil fuels, coal, and ultimately petroleum. And in comparison to coal, when utilized in cars and ships, petroleum brought flexibility as it could be transported with ease and used in different types of vehicles. That in itself represented a new type of weapon and a basic strategic advantage. Within a few decades of this energy transition, petroleum's acquisition took on the spirit of an international arms race. Even more significant, the international corporations that harvested oil throughout the world acquired a level of significance unknown to other industries, earning the encompassing name Big Oil. By the 1920s, Big Oil's product, useless just decades prior, had become the lifeblood of national security to the US and Great Britain. This also makes me wonder. Now, this is also just conjecture and me just kind of thinking ahead, but thinking of big tech and thinking of how the government is also in bed with Palantir. It's a government. It's a corporation based in California. I'll let you do some research on it yourself, but there's a bit of a there's a collaboration there with the government and this tech company that has not made any money. But I digress. Here we go. And from the start of this transition, the massive reserves held in the U.S. marked a strategic advantage with the potential to last generations. Now, I know I don't want to make this video too long, so I'm just going to jump ahead to World War II and just this brief part from World War II. So the U.S. and eventually got into World War II. They were selling oil, but then eventually got into it. For those who are fighting in war, it's expensive. For those who are quote unquote mining the miners, so selling items to people who are in war, they're making a lot of money. So that's why people say war is a business, but it's only really a business to those who actually sell to the people who are in war. To those who are fighting a war, you actually lose a lot of money. If you need an example of that, all you need to do is just look at the history of past empires, one of them being Rome. But I digress. So let's get into this, what's been highlighted here. The Germans only built 1,347 Tiger tanks, whereas the Americans built 49,000 Sherman tanks. And what about that Tiger tank? An icon of the Wehrmacht. I took 1 year of German back in high school, so I don't know if I pronounced that correctly. The heavily armored monster featured a complex 6-speed gearbox designed by Ferdinand Porsche. It was also, actually look at that, Ferdinand Porsche designed it. So again, probably very profitable for him. It was also prone to mechanical malfunction, difficult to sustain in combat, and needed a lot of fuel, one of the many resources Germany sorely lacked. Because Germany was so short on oil, steel, and most critically food, Holland argues the Nazis would have had to crush their enemies completely in the first phase of the war in order to have any chance of winning. So, in addition to food, in addition to steel, which is, based around the foundations of the weapons that they use, and what makes those weapons go is oil. You're short on oil, your security and national security is, on the fence. So moving ahead after this, I don't have an article on this, but I want to talk about Bretton Woods. So many of you guys probably know about Bretton Woods already if you're into gold and into silver. Basically, a really quick story. After World War II, the U.S. actually had most of the world's known gold at the time. Again, they were essentially using war to get a lot of gold essentially from the world. So that is why they had the leverage to denominate the, or essentially to make the reserve currency of the world the US dollar, because they promised that the US dollar would always be backed by gold. So that all changed in the 1970s after Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard. Why did that happen? After a certain point, after Bretton Woods, France and then soon other countries decided to, essentially start, redeeming their gold. They wanted their gold back. They didn't trust the dollar anymore. So they started getting their gold back. And then eventually Nixon said, hey, we're losing all of our gold. We got to stop this. So he closed the gold window. And at that point, he took the dollar off the gold standard. He said it was going to be a temporary thing, and we're still off the gold standard since the early 70s. But you would then think, okay, well, if we're off the gold standard, well, why don't countries, why do they care about U.S. dollars anymore? After a while, you kind of get used to it. I'm sure there's a little bit of that, but also there are certain things that were put in place that made it so that countries kind of needed U.S. dollars, and it comes back to oil. Remember, after World War I, it became known that in order for a country to survive, you need to have oil. Now, check this out. How petrodollars affect the U.S. dollar. After the collapse of the Bretton Woods gold standard in the early 1970s, the United States struck a deal with Saudi Arabia to standardize oil prices in dollar terms. Through this deal, the petrodollar system was born, along with a paradigm shift away from pegged exchange rates and gold-backed currencies to non-backed floating rate regimes. The petrodollar system elevated the US dollar to the world's reserve currency, and through this status, the United States enjoys persistent trade deficits and is a global economic hegemony. The petrodollar system also provides the United States financial markets with a source of liquidity and foreign capital inflows through petrodollar recycling. Now, I'm going to just kind of get in quickly as to why Saudi Arabia decided to make this deal. Essentially, they wanted protection, and they knew that the U.S. had a lot of military backing. So essentially, the U.S. is there to help beef up Saudi Arabia militarily in exchange for having Saudi Arabia only sell their oil or only accept payments for their oil in U.S. dollars, meaning that countries that want to basically have an assured support for themselves and protection for themselves, they need U.S. dollars. So that essentially makes the U.S. dollar relevant. In order for you to be a country worth its salt, in order to protect its citizens, you're going to need oil. How are you going to get oil? Well, who's, one of the biggest oil producers in the world? Saudi Arabia. How does Saudi Arabia, exchange money for oil? They only accept U.S. dollars. Why? Because they need help militarily. And who's there to help them out? The United States. So if you take a look at that, you kind of understand. And if you take a look at all the wars that we've been involved with, everything since then, you can kind of understand why things have been playing out war-wise in the way they have since the 70s. Take a look at Saudi Arabia and its issues with Yemen. Take a look at our involvement with a war in Yemen, most recently. So a lot of these things start to make sense after you understand that all you have to do is just figure out what's going on with the money. I'm not going to make too much conjecture. I hate doing that. I try to control myself. So I'm just going to leave it there. But that is the tie between the dollar and oil. We're going to get into some other interesting connections as well. But I just wanted to leave you guys with that. Thank you, and thank you for watching Black Bullion. Please like and subscribe if you like this information. If you want more information like it, please let me know, and I would be glad to give you more information. All right. Thank you. Have a good one. Bye.